The gym was buzzing with the usual energy, weights clanging, trainers shouting, and a few fans sneaking glimpses at the famous faces working out. But today, the atmosphere shifted the moment Mike Tyson walked in. The former heavyweight champion moved with the kind of confidence only legends possess, muscles taut, eyes sharp, jaw set. He exuded dominance. Every step seemed to declare, "I'm the most dangerous man here." Across the room, a figure sat calmly in the corner, doing slow, deliberate stretches. Chuck Norris. He didn't need to shout, or flex, or prove anything. Yet, his presence alone drew attention. A few people noticed the quiet power radiating from him, the kind that doesn't demand recognition, it earns it. Mike's eyes caught him immediately. A smirk formed. "So, you're the guy they talk about," he said aloud, loud enough for Chuck to hear. "Quiet, mysterious, probably thinks he's untouchable." He laughed, shaking his head. "We'll see about that." Chuck looked up slowly. No expression. No arrogance. Just calm, unwavering focus. He said nothing, continuing his stretches as if the words hadn't even reached him. The contrast was electric. Everyone around sensed the tension before it fully ignited. Mike, used to being the most intimidating man in any room, didn't know what to make of it. His smirk faltered for just a split second, a moment no one else could have noticed, but it was there. Crowds of gymgoers started whispering. Phones were subtly lifted, cameras recording. Some fans tried to distance themselves, sensing the storm before it hit. Others leaned closer, hungry for the drama about to unfold. Mike stepped closer to Chuck, his voice low, menacing. "Don't just sit there. Say something. Prove you're not scared." Chuck finally straightened, looking Mike directly in the eyes. His voice was calm, but every word carried weight. "Intimidation doesn't work on me. I don't need to prove anything to anyone." The room went silent. Every person present felt it, an invisible line had been drawn. Mike, a man who had never backed down, had just met someone who didn't flinch. And in that instant, everyone knew, this wasn't going to be a normal day. No one there knew this would become the biggest mistake of Mike Tyson's life. The air in the gym had shifted. It wasn't just tension anymore, it was anticipation. Everyone sensed something monumental was about to happen. Mike Tyson, the living legend, the man who had instilled fear in the ring, was now facing someone who didn't flinch at fear itself, Chuck Norris. Mike stepped closer, letting his reputation do the talking. "You're pretty quiet, huh?" "I like quiet. Means you're hiding something, probably scared of what's coming." He circled Chuck slowly, a predator testing its prey. Chuck didn't move. His calmness was almost irritating. "I don't hide. And I don't fear what hasn't proven itself," he said evenly. His voice was low, controlled, and carried a quiet authority that made people instinctively step back. Mike laughed, a short, sharp bark. "You think you can talk to me like that? You've got guts. I respect that. But let's see if you can back it up." His fists clenched slightly, not in threat, but in habit, the motion of a man ready to fight at a moment's notice. Bystanders began to record, smartphones casually lifting to capture the scene. A few whispered, "Is this really happening?" Tyson's never met someone like this before. The energy in the room was electric, crackling with tension. Mike leaned closer, his voice dropping to a growl. "You know, I've faced some of the toughest fighters in history. Some of them scared the hell out of me. But you look calm. Too calm. I don't like calm." Chuck's eyes narrowed, not in fear, but in assessment. He exhaled slowly. "Calm isn't weakness. It's preparation. It's control. Something you might want to try before throwing your next punch." The crowd couldn't help but murmur. Mike's jaw tightened. His ego wasn't used to being challenged without provocation. He thrived on reaction, on intimidation. But Chuck wasn't reacting. He was existing, completely composed. A young man near the corner couldn't resist, holding up his phone. "This is insane." Tyson versus Norris, in the same room. Where are you watching this from, guys? Comment your city or country. Mike glanced at the crowd, annoyed at the distraction, then back at Chuck. You think this is all jokes? He asked. I don't joke in the ring. I don't joke with people who think they're untouchable. Chuck leaned back slightly, still relaxed. I've faced people tougher than you. Not to prove anything, but to stay disciplined. That's all. Strength isn't about punching first, it's about knowing when to act. The bystanders were mesmerized. Some fans whispered nervously, others laughed quietly at Mike's growing frustration. The contrast couldn't be clearer: Mike, explosive and instinctive; Chuck, calm and deliberate. Mike's pride was wounded, though he wouldn't admit it. His fists were no longer clenched in habit, they were clenched in frustration. You talk too much for someone who hasn't thrown a punch yet, he muttered. Chuck tilted his head slightly, a small smirk forming. I don't need to throw a punch to show who I am. But if you insist. The crowd shifted uncomfortably, sensing the underlying challenge. Some pulled out more phones, sensing viral content in the making. And in that moment, it became clear, this wasn't just a confrontation of strength. It was a battle of reputations, of pride, and of control. Mike Tyson, a man who had never been ignored, was facing someone whose silence spoke louder than any punch could. And the question on everyone's mind, audience and bystanders alike, was, who would break first? Where are you watching this from? Drop your city or country in the comments and tell us what you think happens next. The room seemed to hold its breath. Every eye was on Mike and Chuck. No one could predict the outcome. One thing was certain, this was the beginning of a story no one would forget. The tension in the gym had become almost unbearable. Every person present felt it, the electric charge of two legends about to collide, not in a ring, but in a silent standoff that demanded attention. Mike Tyson, breathing heavily from anticipation, paced slowly around Chuck Norris. Every eye followed him. Every whisper rose and fell like the swell of a storm. Mike stopped just a few feet away from Chuck, leaning slightly forward, his tone both playful and threatening. I've faced the best of the best, he said, his voice low and gravelly. Some of them made me think twice before throwing a punch. But you're different. You think you're untouchable, huh? Chuck Norris didn't flinch. He didn't rise to the bait. He simply crossed his arms and stared at Mike, calm and unshaken. I'm untouchable only to those who let fear control them, he replied evenly. His words carried weight, authority, and a quiet confidence that silenced the murmuring crowd. Mike's smirk twisted into a scowl. Oh, I'll show you untouchable, he said, leaning in closer, fists clenched instinctively. You think calmness is strength? I'll see how calm you are when I start moving. The gym went silent. Even the clanging of weights seemed to fade into the background. Phones were out everywhere now, capturing every second of the growing tension. Some bystanders were holding their breath, unsure whether to cheer, laugh, or hide. Chuck tilted his head slightly, a subtle smile forming. You don't need to move first, he said. Strength is knowing when to act. Power is knowing when not to. Mike's jaw tightened. This was a man who had spent his life in the ring, a man who thrived on intimidation and immediate reactions, and now he was facing someone who simply refused to react. Frustration began to seep into Mike's body language. His foot tapped. His fists flexed. His voice grew sharper. You think you can just sit there and lecture me? Mike growled. I've knocked out legends. I've fought monsters. You think you're better than me? Chuck Norris finally stood. Slowly. Deliberately. The room felt smaller, as if the space itself was reacting to the presence of two legends. Better isn't the point, he said. Discipline, control, respect, that's what matters. You've got raw power. I've got control. That's the difference. The crowd gasped. Mike's eyes flickered, a mix of disbelief and irritation. No one had ever challenged him like this, never without raising a hand. He had always been the force that others reacted to. Now, he was the one being tested. The murmurs grew louder. Some shouted, "Go Tyson!" Others whispered, "Wait. Norris isn't scared at all." The crowd was divided, just like the story unfolding before them. Phones recorded every angle, every expression, every micro-movement. This was the kind of viral moment social media dreamed of. Mike clenched his fists tighter, his voice dropping to a growl. "You talk too much for someone who hasn't thrown a punch yet." Chuck tilted his head again, completely composed. "I don't need to throw a punch to prove anything," he said softly. "But if you insist." The tension became unbearable. Every bystander leaned in. Every fan wanted to witness the clash that the world would soon be talking about. And in the midst of it all, one voice from the crowd shouted, "What would you do here? Type fight or walk away?" In the comments the room had gone deathly silent, yet every eye was glued to the space between Mike Tyson and Chuck Norris. It wasn't just two men standing there, it was two legacies, two philosophies, two forces quietly measuring each other. Mike's chest rose and fell rapidly. He was used to being feared, used to controlling the energy in any room. But Chuck's calm demeanor was unnerving. There was no bravado, no flinching, no visible signs of fear, just a quiet confidence that seemed to fill the entire gym. Mike clenched his fists and stepped closer. "You think you're untouchable?" "I've knocked out giants," he said, his voice low, dangerous. "I've faced monsters in the ring. You're nothing like them." Chuck tilted his head, his eyes scanning Mike calmly, as if assessing not just his strength, but his spirit. "I've faced fighters who relied on raw power," Chuck said evenly. "Some feared their opponents. Others underestimated them. Both made the same mistake, thinking that intimidation could substitute for control." The crowd murmured, sensing the weight in Chuck's words. A few seasoned martial arts enthusiasts in the corner whispered to each other, recognizing the subtle warnings. "This is not just a man, this is a master of discipline." Mike's lips curled into a smirk, masking his irritation. "You're all talk," he muttered. "Let's see if your talk can back up a punch." Chuck finally took a step forward, not aggressive, not threatening, just precise. "I don't need to prove myself with a punch," he said. "Some things are learned over a lifetime: control, patience, respect. And some lessons, you only learn when you make a mistake." Mike laughed, sharp and nervous. "I don't need lessons. I'm a champion. I've faced the best fighters in the world. You think you can scare me with words?" A subtle tension ripple moved through the crowd. Some bystanders started whispering Chuck's reputation, stories of his discipline, his countless victories in martial arts tournaments, his ability to anticipate and counter moves before they even happened. "That's Chuck Norris," someone murmured. "He's not just a fighter. He's a legend in every sense of the word." But Mike didn't hear. He was too consumed by ego, by pride, by the challenge staring him down. His fists flexed and unclenched, his jaw tight. "We'll see about that," he said, almost under his breath. Chuck remained still, letting the words hang in the air. His eyes never left Mike's. There was no need to act yet. The warning was clear to anyone paying attention, but pride often blinds the strongest men. The crowd sensed it. Whispers turned into low chatter. "Do you think Tyson's realizing who he's dealing with? I've never seen him hesitate like this." Phones lifted higher. Social media feeds were already lighting up with clips of the standoff, captions screaming, "Tyson versus Norris, the gym showdown." Chuck's voice cut through the rising tension, calm but unmistakable. "Strength without control is chaos. Power without patience is wasted. And those who underestimate discipline always pay the price." Mike froze for a fraction of a second, a tiny crack in his armor, but a crack nonetheless. Every person in the room felt it. The first real sign that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't going to go the way he expected. A young bystander whispered into his phone camera, "No one here knows what's coming, but I think Tyson just met someone who might actually teach him a lesson." Mike's eyes narrowed, and Chuck's smirk widened slightly. Not mocking, just knowing. The warning had been delivered. The challenge had been set. The audience, phones recording every angle, could sense the storm before it even began. Mike thought strength was everything, but he forgot one thing. Can you guess what it is? Comment your answer below. And in that moment, the gym wasn't just a gym anymore, it was an arena of pride, control, and an unspoken test of legends. The world was about to witness a lesson in strength that no one would ever forget. Mike's eyes narrowed at the challenge, his pride screaming at him to act, but a small, unspoken part of him realized this was no ordinary opponent. And that was the beginning of a moment that would define the story forever, the moment when raw power met disciplined control, and everyone watching knew that history was quietly unfolding right before their eyes. The gym felt smaller now. Every sound, every movement was amplified. Mike Tyson's sharp breaths, the faint shuffle of Chuck Norris's feet, even the distant hum of the ventilation system. Tension crackled in the air like electricity before a storm. The audience held their collective breath. Everyone knew something monumental was about to happen. Mike's fists remained clenched, his instincts screaming at him to strike, to assert dominance, to prove that he was still the most feared man in any room. He had faced legends. He had knocked down giants. He had been the predator, not the prey. And yet, something about Chuck made him hesitate. Just a fraction of a second, but in a fighter's world, fractions of a second were everything. "You talk too much," Mike muttered, his gravelly voice tight with frustration. "I've faced killers in the ring. I've fought men who didn't blink. And you just stare. Do you even know what fear is?" Chuck didn't raise an eyebrow. He didn't flinch. He simply exhaled slowly, as though the tension didn't exist. Then, his voice cut through the silence, calm, precise, commanding. "Fear is only dangerous when it controls you. Confidence is dangerous when it blinds you. And pride is always your enemy if it isn't tempered by respect." The crowd went silent. Some whispered among themselves, shaking their heads in disbelief. A few fans exchanged nervous glances, realizing for the first time that Mike, the man who had never been intimidated, was being tested in a way he wasn't used to. Mike's jaw clenched. Control? Respect? You think that matters when fists do the talking? He spat, his tone almost desperate. Chuck tilted his head slightly, a subtle smirk forming. Fists alone are meaningless if your mind isn't in control. That was the moment the turning point arrived. Chuck took a single step forward, not aggressive, not threatening, just deliberate, and the air around him seemed to shift. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but everyone felt it. Mike's eyes narrowed. Something about Chuck's presence, his quiet dominance, made the room shrink. The predator had met a force that didn't react to intimidation. The whispers grew louder. People in the crowd started recognizing Chuck's reputation, not just as an actor, but as a master martial artist, a man disciplined beyond measure, capable of neutralizing even the most ferocious opponent with precision and calm. Mike glanced at the crowd. Phones were recording every second. His legendary ego bristled at the realization that this confrontation was no longer just between him and Chuck, it had become a spectacle, a story that would spread worldwide. He had always been the center of attention, always the one feared, always the one in control. And now, he felt uncertain. Chuck's voice broke through again, calm but cutting. Power without control is chaos. Strength without discipline is useless. And those who think intimidation alone is victory, are the first to fall. Mike froze for a heartbeat longer than usual. The crowd sensed it. Even the bravest fans leaned forward, some whispering, "He's realizing it. Tyson's realizing something he can't just punch away." Mike's fists unclenched slightly. His breathing, usually rapid and focused, became measured. His instincts told him something crucial: this wasn't about throwing the hardest punch. It wasn't about raw strength. This was a test of patience, control, and understanding, a battlefield of respect and discipline, not fear. Chuck noticed the subtle shift in Mike's posture, the tiny crack in the armor of aggression. He didn't smile widely. He didn't mock. He simply nodded, almost imperceptibly, letting Mike understand on his own what the true turning point was. The crowd leaned closer. Every phone camera was aimed, recording the moment a living legend began to grasp a lesson he hadn't expected to learn in the gym that day. For once, raw power wasn't enough. Pride alone could not dictate the outcome. Chuck took a small, deliberate step back. "Remember this," he said quietly, but so the room could hear. "Strength is temporary. Discipline is eternal. And respect is the true measure of a champion." Mike swallowed hard. The color in his face shifted slightly, the tension in his shoulders eased. The realization was dawning: he had underestimated his opponent. Not because Chuck was physically superior, but because Chuck's control, patience, and presence were unmatched. A young fan in the crowd whispered into his phone, barely audible over the quiet murmurs, "I think Tyson just realized he picked the wrong fight." The gym remained silent except for the faint hum of life around them, but everyone knew something had changed. The fight, if it ever happened, would not be about punches. It would be about ego versus discipline, pride versus control, fear versus respect. And the turning point was complete. Mike Tyson, the man who had never been humbled, had just met someone who showed him, in the calmest possible way, that the rules of strength could be rewritten by wisdom alone. Do you think Mike will step back and learn from this, or push forward? Comment respect or power below. The stage was set for what would come next, the moment when reality fully hit, and the world would witness why picking a fight with Chuck Norris was perhaps the biggest mistake of Mike Tyson's life. The gym had gone completely silent. Even the clanging of weights and the low hum of the air conditioning seemed to vanish, as if the space itself was holding its breath. Mike Tyson, who had faced the most intimidating opponents in the world, now stood frozen in a moment that no punch could fix. Chuck Norris remained calm, his posture straight, his eyes steady. He didn't need to move to dominate the room. The tension in the air was enough to signal to everyone that this wasn't a challenge of strength, it was a lesson in respect and control. Mike's fists hung loosely by his sides, his chest rising and falling rapidly. Pride battled logic inside him. He had always been the predator, the one in control, the man who commanded fear simply by entering a room. And yet, here, he realized he had underestimated his opponent completely. The whispers started again. Fans began recounting Chuck's feats, stories of flawless technique, of discipline honed over decades, of opponents disarmed before a single strike. "That's Chuck Norris," someone muttered. "He doesn't need to fight to win." Mike looked around, noticing for the first time how the crowd was reacting. Phones were out, recording everything. Social media would explode within minutes. But it wasn't the cameras or the fans that made him tense, it was the undeniable presence of someone who didn't need to prove anything. Chuck finally spoke, his voice calm but firm, carrying through the room. "Power is fleeting. Strength is temporary. Respect is earned by how you carry yourself when no one is trying to intimidate you." Mike's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of realization passing across his face. For decades, he had relied on intimidation, raw strength, and aggression to win his battles. But he knew now that none of that mattered in this moment. A murmur rose through the crowd. "Look at Tyson, he's realizing it," someone whispered. "He's actually humbled by him." Mike lowered his head, taking a deep breath. The fight he thought he had picked wasn't physical. It was mental. It was a confrontation of ego against discipline, pride against wisdom. He understood now that he had walked into something far bigger than a gym brawl. Chuck nodded once, not in triumph, but in acknowledgement of the lesson delivered. He didn't gloat. He didn't taunt. He simply let the moment speak for itself. The crowd erupted in subtle applause, not for a fight, but for the grace, wisdom, and humility displayed in front of them. Mike, usually the center of awe and fear, was now learning something more valuable than any title or championship, the true meaning of respect. Have you ever underestimated someone just because they didn't seem threatening? Comment yes or no and tag a friend who needs to see this. Mike finally raised his gaze, meeting Chuck's eyes. There was no challenge there now, only understanding. A silent acknowledgement that the lesson had been received. The energy in the room shifted again. Phones continued recording, whispers turned into excited commentary, and the story of what had just happened began spreading even before it ended. The world would soon see that picking a fight with Chuck Norris wasn't about strength, it was about wisdom, control, and knowing when power isn't enough. Mike stepped back, unclenching his fists fully. For the first time in decades, he realized that some battles weren't won with punches, they were won with discipline, calm, and respect. And as the crowd cheered quietly, Chuck Norris remained composed, the calm eye in the storm, a living example of why legends are not defined by their fists alone. The viral moment had arrived. The world would watch, comment, share, and marvel. And one thing was certain, Mike Tyson had learned a lesson he would never forget. The moment had passed, but the impact was just beginning. Phones continued recording, whispers turned into excited chatter, and social media feeds lit up within minutes. Clips of Mike Tyson standing humbled before Chuck Norris were shared across every platform, from Instagram to TikTok to Twitter. The world was watching, captivated by the encounter that no one had expected. Mike, usually the center of awe and fear, now stood quietly, absorbing the lesson. He had entered the gym confident, ready to assert dominance, certain that raw power would carry the day. But in front of Chuck Norris, he had realized something far more important. True strength wasn't measured by fists, punches, or intimidation. It was measured by discipline, control, and respect. Chuck Norris, calm as ever, had not needed to raise a hand, shout, or prove his dominance physically. He had let his presence, his wisdom, and his unwavering discipline speak for him. And the world had taken notice. Comments poured in, never underestimate calm over chaos. Real strength is in patience, not power. Even the strongest can be humbled by wisdom. Fans began dissecting the encounter. Analysts and martial artists praised the lesson, noting that while Tyson's power was legendary, Chuck's control and mastery of both mind and body made him untouchable in a different sense. News outlets highlighted the story as a viral moment of humility, discipline, and respect, a lesson the world desperately needed. Mike himself, though humbled, smiled faintly. He acknowledged the lesson with grace. In interviews that followed, he didn't boast about his strength, or even the initial confrontation. Instead, he spoke about what he had learned. I went in thinking it was about fists, about power. But I realized it's about control, respect, and knowing your limits. That's a lesson I'll never forget. The story went viral not because of a fight, but because of the lesson it carried. It reminded people worldwide that real strength is about humility, self-discipline, and the courage to accept when you're wrong. Videos amassed millions of views within hours. Comments flooded in from every corner of the globe. People shared the story with friends and family, inspired by the idea that even the mightiest could learn from wisdom. The gym encounter became more than a viral clip, it became a symbol. A reminder that ego, pride, and raw power are fleeting, but discipline, control, and respect endure. The world collectively marveled at how two legends, one known for raw force, the other for calm mastery, had taught a lesson in the most unforgettable way. If you believe real strength comes from discipline and respect, type respect in the comments, backhand index pointing down, and share this story with someone who needs to see it. Subscribe for more inspiring legendary moments like this. Mike Tyson walked away from that encounter not defeated, but transformed. He understood that humility and wisdom could be more powerful than fists. Chuck Norris didn't need to prove anything, he had already done so by standing still, calm, and confident. And the world watched. The lesson spread across countries, languages, and cultures. From gyms to schools, people repeated the story, inspired not by violence, but by the power of calm, the authority of discipline, and the respect that true strength demands. In the end, everyone learned the same thing: picking a fight with Chuck Norris isn't just risky, it's a lesson in respect that goes viral.